It took me almost a week to clean up my garage, to work on the bird bath and maybe get it running, but I guess the parts magnet got jealous. Now, if you paid attention to some of my videos, I really didn't show my garage because it was a piled up mess. And it literally took me almost 4 days, full days, probably 10, 12-hour days in some cases, to clean everything out of this garage and completely put it back in here in some type of organized fashion. But I think I did pretty good. Oop, can't show that. But this is the dash for the bird bath and everything. And if you notice, you can walk all the way around the truck now. I cleaned up my tools. I put them back in the toolbox for the most part. And look, I even organized my paint section. Look at all that. I didn't realize I had that much paint. But to get to the subject on the video, that air compressor I just put in, I'm assuming it's the air compressor, doesn't like to turn on when it's supposed to. So I don't know if it's the height adjustment switch that's in the back of the car, or if this air compressor kind of locked up like the other one. This one had been out in the weather because the car that I got it off of didn't have a hood, so I wasn't expecting a long life, but I was hoping maybe more than a month and a half. But oh well. I only paid $20 for that, and it was a $20 gamble, and I got a month out of it. Oh well. So, I started organizing parts. I've made it so that I can air up my car if I need to with the air compressor, which I really don't need to, unless I start playing with the buttons. If I don't play with the button, I can put air in it and it'll stay up. So, to make it adjustable, I need to add some items. Now this is a fun little contraption right here, and I still of course have to actually physically put it together, put Teflon tape, sealant, all that fancy stuff. And this is a valve off of my Ford Ranger. My Ford Ranger had 4 of these, and they've been sitting out in the weather, so I'm gonna have to probably take this all the way apart and refurbish it, take a wire wheel to it and clean off some of the corrosion. I've gotten some new fittings for it. I went from 1/2 inch that I had for the Ranger down to 3/8 coming from the tank, and of course for the rear bags 3/16, which these little bad boys are kind of hard to find. This whole contraption right here was about $40 worth of brass. Yep, and I still have one of these pieces that's on the car. This would go to one bag and the other one would go to the other bag, and this would be going to a air gauge. And this is the air gauge I'm planning on using. As you can see, I've kind of already got, dropping parts. I kind of already have everything hooked up, and it's a dual needle gauge made by Easy Street. And I picked it up at the car show a long time ago, and I'm going to use it. Mount this in the car somewhere so I can see what air is going into the bags in the back, so I kind of know what height I'm at. And yeah, so I'm going to work on this. And well, it's the next night, and I spent last night tearing this thing apart, which I'd forgot is pretty complicated. Took me a good little while to do anything. I didn't film any of this because I'm going to have to rebuild the others. Give me a second. Let's walk over here and I'll show you what I got. See, I originally had this set up for the Ford Ranger, and it was going to have like 1/2 inch out. Even though these are only 3/8 ports, everything was going to be 1/2 inch lines and everything. But since this car's already got the 3/16 style stuff on the rear bags, I'm going to keep the 3/16 on the rear bags and just make it simple. Well, even though it's going to be overcomplicated for the setup, and we'll go into wiring later, which is, I had to draw out a big old map to make everything work, and yeah, it looks better than it did. This was probably one of the roughest ones. That's why I rebuilt this one first. I hooked it up to some 12 volt last night, and it seemed to get everything working.
Does it look like it's sitting lower? Because I think it's sitting lower. I took the bump stops out, and I think it's sitting lower. Oh well. I've done a little work off camera today, and let's show you what I've done. Climb down in this unit. Okay, so I had the car jacked up, kind of sketchy, so I didn't show it to you all. But I was up underneath of it, and I disconnected the factory air lines and ran some 3/16 air brake line to them. And what I've done is I've run that through a factory grommet. I don't know if you can see it. There's a factory grommet back there. I drilled 2 holes through the grommet because there's plenty of space, and ran those up through. And right now they're just out hanging out the car, because when I had the amp out to do all this work, I figured I'd go ahead and put the wiring in for the air compressor. And I've added a ground. Yes, it's kind of sketchy looking, but I've added a ground. I used a collet, flattened it, and then drilled a hole through it, so it's made kind of like a washer. And since it's connected to the whole unit, it gives me a ground. That comes out. And I've added in a fuse and this wire that comes out to a distribution block. Now, hopefully I ought to be able to run all my electrical off of this and somehow do a ground system here. So I'm going to put my amp and everything back together and see if everything still works. And then I'm going to see if I can mount my valve over here if I can. So I got the amp hooked back up. I think I'm going to mount the valve down here like this. That may give me enough room to mount the other one up top. If not, I don't know where I'm going to put that. That's going to be fun relocating all that stuff. So I went ahead and mounted my valve. It's only got 1 screw in it right now because I want to make sure everything works before I permanently mount everything. But I've got the 2 air line going into the airbags. It kind of kinked the one, but that's fine. If I have to, I can shorten it. Just need another compression, the little compression sleeve. 37 cents at the hardware store, but oh well. Now I've hooked up an extra line that's going to run to the front. It's going to be going to an air gauge, but as of right now, I've hooked it up to this contraption and filled it up with my air compressor. And I put air back in it, so it's not sitting on the ground again. So I'm probably going to have to hook up the air tank, because I've been messing with the valves, and I think you have to have air pressure going into the valve before it'll work correctly. You had to have air pressure hooked up to that valve before it's going to work. So now this opens the factory airbags open. And when I show you all the wiring diagram I'm gonna have to do later, it's gonna be confusing. But I think I've got it so it'll work the way I want to. Now, that hurt. Now, so I've got the valve open up front, and this is my up and this is my dump. I have it temporarily hooked to a ground right now. I'm just testing stuff. So I'm raising up. I know you can't tell because you're sitting inside the car, but I'm raising up and I'm dumping. Which actually it raises up and dumps relatively fast when you have air pressure on it as opposed to an air compressor, because the air compressor just takes so long to fill it. And it seems like about 60, maybe 70 ultra high is the high air pressure going into it. So it's not a lot of air pressure, a lot of volume. I'm gonna have to ground this and then run these 2 wires into the car and hook them up to my switch, and I might be able to go ahead and hook up the air compressor at that point. I have a ground hooked up, kind of temporary right now, so when I get another ground strap, I'll hook it up permanently. I ran the red wires, as you can see, through the back firewall. And I had these and I had these wires that have fuses in them. So I'm going to go ahead and use them because what's an extra fuse? And I've run it up to the front temporary right now, and I'm trying to figure out my switch. Now I'm going to throw up a wiring diagram so you can kind of see what I've got going on, but I'm going to have to rewire what I had wired up before, and I hope everything works. I got some items hooked up last night. I went ahead and hooked up the tank. It's got a couple screws in it. Right now I've got it hooked up to my little cheap air compressor, which takes a long time for it to fill up. But I've got 3 gallons full at about 100 PSI right now. I went ahead and wired up the electrical switch. When you see my diagram, I wired it up here instead of wiring it back at the factory valves. I wired it up here where it goes to the factory valve, so up and dump both send a signal to the factory valves, and then I have my up and my dump for the bigger valve. So as you can tell, it went up a little bit. It goes up pretty high. And it goes down just a little bit lower than what it was before because I took that to bump stops. And it comes up relatively quick if I've got enough air pressure. I need to go today and get a ring terminal, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for the ground, and I'm going to run my power right straight to my solenoid to kick on and off the air compressor. So I need to get a ring terminal for that, and I need to get some terminals for my pressure switch. And once I get those, I should be able to go ahead and mount the air compressor and get it wired up. So I've got my air compressor wired up. I ran that cable from the battery up to the solenoid, and of course the solenoid goes down to the compressor. I had to ground the solenoid. That's the one with the red you can see right there. The yellow wire coming off goes over to a pressure switch, and the pressure switch goes back up to the solenoid, so it turns on and off. Now I probably should put a toggle switch on or something out here just to keep it from running that battery down, because I fired it up without starting the car and it ran the little digital readout back there down to like 11.3 volts. Fired up the car and it had 13 volts and the air compressor ran real nice. So in fact, let's go ahead and fire up the car and I'll show you what works. Should be able to tell, yeah, it says 14 volts. So let's play with some switch. Now it's down all the way right now. Once it hits that certain height, it just pops up real quick. Still kind of slow. I'm not worried about speed. I was always one to just kind of like lay it out in the parking lot and walk away from it. Like, it goes up extremely high. Like, look at how high that is. That's probably too much. Now, the air compressor seemed to fill up pretty quick. It's a little loud, but that's better. See, look, it already turned off. I was gonna say, I wonder how loud it is in the car without the back seat. Now, of course, everything's just kind of in there temporary right now, because when I go to bag the front and get all that working, well, I'm gonna have to put a valve back there. So everything's got to come back out again. Well, I've been driving it around with this hooked up for the past couple weeks, and I've had a few issues. You remember that line that I said that was kinked back there? That one got me. Yep. What was happening is it was kinked so bad that it was actually pinching off the air line, and that means that the passenger side wasn't letting up air or letting down air, or if it was at a really slow speed. So that means the car would start sitting at different angles, and it was making it so I couldn't steer correctly. It was a lot of problems. So that was one of the first things I had to fix. I shortened up the airline from the other side back there and just swapped lines, and that seemed to fix it. Now both sides seem to come up pretty level and to go down pretty level. Then a couple days later, I parked my car and was listening to my stereo, and I was like, well, wait a minute, what's wrong here? Because it sounds like my amp's clipping. And yes, my amp was clipping. The reason being is because the battery was acting up. It only says it was only reading 8 point something volts, and I was like, tell me that battery's already gone bad. So I started playing around with stuff, took air compressor out because the air compressor didn't want to turn on, did a couple different things, and what I found out was my ground that was down here had come loose. Not loose, but loose enough that it wasn't connecting. So I drilled another hole through that terminal. Hopefully you can see it. I drilled another hole through that terminal and shot a big old screw through it. That helped a little bit, but what really helped was me adding this blue ground wire into the system. I ran it from here into my terminal over here. Once I did that, everything clicked and went to like 13 volts. So at that same point in time, I moved this back a little bit so it's not clanging up against the compressor. That was what was making a lot of the noise and making it rattle real bad. So it seems like it's working fine right now. Of course, when you do something like this to your car, you're going to have to go back and fix problems later. It actually made it a little bit faster too. See, that was all the way up. That was almost at like limo height. And it comes way down. These bags actually have some really good lift on them. I'm surprised. And I believe that's sitting all the way down right now. It is tucking some tire. Might be a little bit more and come out of it. And it goes way up. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but that is a lot quieter than what it was. Running 11.9 volts because I don't have the car running. So let me go ahead and turn that off for right now. So now I'm happy with what I've done. I definitely thank you for stopping in and checking out this video. And if you would, check out some of my other videos. I've got a whole series on the parts magnet and multiple other car shows. If you would, like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid.